Welcome to another terrifying Reddit story. Today we have 3 chilling stories to share, so get your candied teeth and your cup of blood, and let's get right into the horror. The Old Waterhouse. The Old Waterhouse over the health. There was an ancient crumbling waterhouse where the entire estate's water system was managed. Believe me, we thought it was a miracle how anything that old and manky could keep and pump out any water. But it did. It was made with bricks, with a black slate roof and iron doors. Although at the time of this incident, it was just a shadow of its former self, and didn't have any doors. The windows were all smashed in by generations of kids throwing rocks and stones at them. It was there where my mama and her siblings were kids played over the heath, and they all told us it spooked them and their mates as it did us. It was a really hot day one summer, in the school holidays. The older boys were at home for some reason, and all the younger cousins, me included, were being little brats, so the boys said they would take us all blackberry picking to keep us quiet. Mama agreed gratefully. The boys were really responsible and mature at 16, 17, and 18. They babysat for us younger kids all the time, so we all knew the rules of staying close to the boys and doing what they told us. And so, a half hour later, everyone had their fruit buckets and we were off. There were 5 of us younger kids. We were all really excited, as blackberry picking was a great family favorite activity, and our Gran's blackberry pies were the best. Gran's house led directly onto the back of the heath. There was a fence with a gap at the end. One of my older cousins passed me through to the other, then lifted my tiny wheelchair over the fence. The other kids were through in seconds, and we were away again. On our way to our destination, the older boys told us spooky stories, as they always did. Half because they liked scaring us, and a half because we all used to beg them to. There was nothing more terrifying than a story from my cousins H or B. They were masters and so believable. We loved it. We all stopped talking when we came to the waterhouse. Nobody ever dared to speak around or near the waterhouse, not even the older boys. For something so mundane, it always looked, and still does, so eerie. There was a second fence to get through before we reached our beloved blackberry field. But this time, as we squeezed through the gap of the fence, we were all more somber as we remembered the old wives' tale / urban legend that we all knew about the waterhouse. The story goes, once in the early 1960s, there was a gang of bank robbers. They were local to the area and were really nasty pieces of work. Their expertise was terrorizing bank customers and staff alike before grabbing and shooting anything that moved. They did several jobs without getting caught, but they really messed up a particular job, and a sweet 19-year-old trainee bank clerk was shot dead, and 5 more people were seriously injured. One of the gang was also shot dead, along with the nastiest member of the gang being seriously wounded in the crossfire. It is said that the remaining gang members escaped with just a few hundred and made their way over to the heath and hid out in the waterhouse. It was newish at that time and was a perfect hideaway for the murderers. There was a lot of contention and stress between the remaining gang, months, although it was never proven how. The bodies of all 3 of the remaining gang members were discovered rotting away in the waterhouse 6 months later. A few years after the weird stuff and creepy noises started occurring near and around the waterhouse, mysterious, hairy figures were glimpsed moving stealthily amongst the pipes and wires. A dank, moldy, rotten smell, like aging river weeds, was always smelt around the area of the waterhouse, and eerie wails and menacing murmurs could be heard day and night. In the late 70s, there was a spate of mysterious deaths of homeless people who would shelter over the heath not too far from the Waterhouse. There was nothing to ever link the deaths to the Waterhouse, but the locals soon started giving the Waterhouse and surrounding area a wide berth because of the creepy history and dark reputation, and that left the Waterhouse abandoned and in disrepair. That's what we knew of the Waterhouse's dark history. That is why we were so wary and anxious to get away from it as quickly as possible. When we were all through the gap in the fence further away from the Waterhouse, us younger cousins built up enough courage to glance over at the building of ill repute, before being rounded up by the older boys, put me in my wheelchair again, and we set off to the blackberry field. We soon arrived at the field, where some other local kids we knew were already there, and we spent a nice afternoon picking and eating the juicy sweet blackberries and splashing in the river, and soon the sun was getting low and it was time for home. When we reached the fence before the Waterhouse, the air felt slightly too close, like before a thunderstorm. The youngest of the three older boys got me out of my wheelchair so that B could lift it over the fence. The other kids were already on the other side of the fence with H and B. A suddenly said to his brother in a low, guarded voice, "Something moved at the back of there, bruv." B just looked at him sideways. Out of the boys, A was the most likely one to pull a stunt or wind anyone up for a laugh. But A was straight-faced. A said, "I'm going to have a look," passing me through to B and squeezing past us all. "Wait up, A, we've got to..." Having put me in my wheelchair, B had moved forward towards his brother when we all heard A shriek out in horror and disgust, and the two boys moved back quickly. H, having already taken me out of my wheelchair again, had told everyone to run, and we did. B picking up my tiny wheelchair, folding it up while running, A grabbing the other two kids' hands and following B and H running with me on his shoulders. Holding my other cousin's hands, we ran and ran. A kept saying, "Don't look back, don't look back." I did, but saw nothing. We didn't stop till we got to the fence which leads back to the road on the estate, and we could actually see civilization again. We were all completely exhausted, especially the older boys. Before we slipped through the fence to the road, B, holding himself up by the railings, asked, "What did you see, A?" Yellow eyes, hairy face." All of us younger kids began to panic and scream, and H had to calm us all down. He said that we were safe and it would be all right, but we all wanted to get as far away from the Waterhouse as possible. When we got home, we all looked bedraggled and slightly nervy. Mama and my auntie noticed this and asked the boys what was wrong. H just said that we just got spooked by an old drunk man in the bushes, looking for golf balls to sell. And as that was quite commonplace over the heath, Mama and my auntie just gave us kids a pep talk and hugged us. We never did tell my mama or my auntie the truth about the yellow eyes and hairy face, or find out what it actually was, but us kids didn't go near the Waterhouse for a long time after. I know this sounds fantastical and wild, and I agree. This is in fairly remote, backcountry West Virginia, which is known for being old and haunted. It was experienced entirely by two of us, but the worst parts by all four. This led to all four of us at some point battling personal issues in our lives that I believe stemmed directly from this encounter. The following is, at least to my memory, and what I've been able to corroborate with the other people that were there, 100% accurate and true. When I was 17, 2004, we had a bad experience camping near haunted train tunnels and sites of sudden tragic death. History of immediate 1 square mile area. Mother and son drowning in the creek nearby. Old man hung himself from this old dead tree that hung over the water. Cliché creepy dead hanging tree, I know. Drug dealers killed in state police shootout at a nearby hunting cabin, and many years before, cheap laborers had been killed building this double set of train tunnels. They were actually buried in a long-forgotten little graveyard nearby the tunnels that has since been found and restored. We decided to go camping before graduation as a friend group of 4, just to do something one last time before we all went our separate ways in life. This is private property on the backside of a big forested hill, around which the creek flows in a huge, several-mile-long bend. Camp set up, fire going. Shortly after nightfall, my cousin and I sat on the creek bank, maybe 20 yards away from camp, spotlighting fish in the water. We began to hear a rhythmic slosh of what sounded like someone wading through the water, maybe halfway up their shin deep. So we shined the light around upstream. We then spotted the symmetrically and rhythmically consistent disturbance made by what looked and sounded like invisible feet/legs sloshing towards us. When we would turn our spotlight off, it would start. It would stop when illuminated. It was reacting to us, and this was the first ice bucket stomach clench moment we knew this was not fish and could not rationalize what was happening. This scared us pretty badly, but we decided best to keep it to ourselves and join the others gathered at the fire. As we made our way back, we heard the sloshing make it to where we were on the bank, and the noise stopped. Given the speed we witnessed it moving, and how far it was from us when we were watching it, it must have sped up to make it to the bank we were on in the amount of time it took us to get back to camp. Others at the camp heard it as well, and figured we had either gotten in or somehow riled up some fish, but we just played it off. It sounded and looked like an invisible person wading towards us through the water. After the noise ended at the creek bank, we all saw the tall grass disturbed as something we couldn't see ran around the foliage perimeter of our circularly cleared campsite. This could have been an animal, but it was fast. We then began to hear what sounded like a man talking to us, as in speaking into the ear of each person, the left ear if that matters. At first it sounded garbled, but after maybe 15 to 20 seconds, we could make out the words saying, "We shouldn't be there," and "we needed to leave," before finally addressing us directly and saying slightly more forcefully, "You need to leave." Obviously, this was terrifying, and at first we thought there was a person or group of people out there walking up on our camp, and that is dangerous. We were all frozen with fear, but then adrenaline hit. As we freaked out and started to run to our ATV, all 4 of us saw a tall black shadow man wearing what looked like a hat, relaxing against the front of our ATV. It straightened up when we saw it, and it saw us, and it just sort of hung there, staring at us for a few seconds. No feet. The legs ended in sort of wavy lines, like looking above the fire at the heat waves. It stood out against the dark night behind it. The girl screamed, which broke our fear freeze, and it zipped like the flash back towards the train tunnels people had died in. Interestingly, when we went to start the ATV, it turned over sluggishly, as if the battery had been slightly drained, despite working fine not long before when we rode it down. This entire event happened over the course of maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and within an hour of the sun going down. After putting our story out there, I received a lot of feedback from people who have also had bad encounters in this area over many years. Even a guy I worked with, who I didn't know knew this area, told me that my uncle had hired him to trap in that area, and it was the only place he didn't check traps alone at night. He said it was almost like the animals leave that place at night. No less than a month later, my uncle, who owns the property, was up on the hill raccoon hunting at night with a dog. At some point, the dog was on a rock face up above him and knocked a large rock loose that fell and struck my uncle in the side of the neck. This understandably messed him up pretty bad and paralyzed almost his entire body, but he still had limited functionality on his left side. We could never figure out how he got himself back to his ATV and turned it around and drove himself out of there. It wasn't until probably 2 or 3 years later, around Halloween, when my story makes it arounds on the local Facebook groups that my uncle texted my mother out of the blue. You have no reason to believe my uncle's character reference, but he is a salt of the earth, hunting, farming, working man, even working past his retirement as a millionaire. Honest, funny, just an incredibly stand-up guy. He is easygoing, but also no nonsense. In his text to my mother, he said, "I've never told anybody this before, and I probably won't again. The man in the hat the kids saw at the creek that night helped pick me up off the ground and put me back on my ATV and get me turned around." Until I heard that, I had always assumed that the shadow man was the one who was trying to scare us out of there. But thinking back on it, maybe he was the one whispering to us, telling us we need to leave and possibly avoid something scarier and more dangerous, although I have no idea what could have been scarier than that. I was in my gothic phase, still am, and my papito and I were not on good terms. He was hosting a family reunion auction, and so we went to New York to acquire some goods to sell. When he returned, he had a couple of big boxes full of jewelry. He tried to sweeten me up by telling me I could have first pick. I went down and had a look. This was in 2010 or so. There was a lot of gaudy stuff, but I did find a few things I liked okay. There was a Surf's Up bracelet, a Tupac chain to give to a crush, and a gaudy necklace that had a big leopard print base and then big gems on top. I came back upstairs and showed my dad my loot, and he was like, "That's all? Go down there and pick out some more before all the good stuff gets sold." I dug through each box carefully, but there were mostly just duplicates of the same jewelry and a few others that were too corny for me. Then I took a final look in the box and found a necklace that didn't fit it. It had a wooden carved skull as the amulet, and the necklace was made up of miniature white skull beads. I smelled it, and it had a distinct, smoky, and sweet aroma. I was excited because it was goth looking. I showed it to my dad, and he said that he didn't remember getting that necklace, but shrugged it off. It was too small for my head, so I cut the string and extended it with some hemp I had. From that point, I never took it off. Now at the time, I had already had a lot of magical experiences and felt a bit like an outcast. My lunch number was 10,666 for crying out loud. My friends were fascinated by the necklace. One of them touched it and said he felt like it didn't want to go to him. Later that morning at school, I made a joke about that same friend getting sick from the school's chocolate milk, only for seconds later him to start puking after drinking a carton. Next were people claiming they were getting weird texts from nowhere that said "Hex" when seated next to me. I was at my lunch table, and one of the girls who sat there was genuinely terrified of me for some reason. I was getting tired of all the witch jokes and teased the whole table that I hoped they all didn't get food poisoning. The next day at lunch, only 2 people of the 8 were there. I asked where the others were and was told they called out sick. Then I was in Spanish class and the witch jokes continued. A kid wanted to skip class and told me to give him a headache so he could leave. Now this kid, to be fair, believed magic was nonsense and that I was attention-seeking. He more so wanted to embarrass me. I told him, "Ta-da, you have a headache." Nothing seemed to happen. But then about 30 minutes later, he started grabbing his head and asking me what I did. I was like, "Come on, man." He said, "No, I'm serious." He then got permission to leave class to go to the nurse's office. Again, I felt like the witch jokes were getting stale. So then I'm on the school bus, and one of the girls I considered a friend was making fun of another girl who had a cold sore, saying she had herpes. I stood up and told her to stop bullying the girl, or it could happen to her next. 2 days later, she got on the bus covering her mouth, saying, "This is your fault." I was like, "What?" She moved her hands away, and she had a huge cold sore on her lip. This is where things took a turn. My sister and I got into an argument, and I told her I hoped she wrecked her car. One day when I got home from school, my dad sat me down and showed me a photo of my sister's totaled car. My nephew had been in the car as well. They were all okay, but this terrified me. I was scared to make jokes or say anything I would regret. Word had spread at my school and on my school bus that I was a witch. Another atheist friend of mine was defending me on the bus ride home one day. He was saying witches weren't real and that he would prove it for once and for all. He asked me to tell him something that would happen and to be specific. I told him that as he got off the bus, he would trip over his shoelace, fall down the bus stairs, and bust his knee on the asphalt. As the ride continued, we were joking and chatting and laughing, and I honestly forgot about what I said. We all did. As Daniel got off the bus, he turned and waved goodbye to me. As he stepped off the steps, he tripped over his shoelaces and fell onto his knees on the asphalt. He stood up and pointed at me and said, "You're really a witch?" I cannot describe how that moment felt for me. Like time was moving slow, like reality was bending. It was so bizarre. My friend looked fearful and confused. The bus was silent. I got off my stop feeling ashamed. Well, it gets stranger. During summer vacation, a few relatives wanted to travel to Gatlinburg, Tennessee and see the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum and the aquarium too. I had a young cousin who went as well. He was about 8 at the time. I was having a blast at the museum. We were looking at a display of the tallest man who ever lived, and we went through a few display cases that had Native American artifacts, which I relate to as an indigenous Brazilian. Finally, my papito said it was time to head back, and we were passing by another case of African artifacts. My cousin started screaming at me, "Look, look!" I was like, "What?" He said, "It's the same as yours." As I turned and looked into the African artifacts case, the exact necklace I was wearing was on display. 2 of them, in fact, showing the front and back of the model. They were identical. Yet again, the world was spinning, and I was so confused. The case said the necklace was theorized to be a healing necklace, but it wasn't for me. It was like a tool to amplify words. It was shocking. I actually submitted my story to a Glitch in the Matrix YouTube channel and figured I would share it here as well. I always believed in magic and felt lucky that I got to experience it. But to be honest, I believed this was all one big prank being pulled on me by my peers until I saw my sister's car wrapped around a light post. And then, when my friend fell, it made it more real. When I saw the same necklace at the museum, I didn't know what to think. How did I get it? How did my papito go to New York to buy cheap jewelry for an auction and end up with this artifact? And why did we randomly travel so far to Gatlinburg and happen to see its sisters in a display case at a museum? What was it trying to show me? I think now how hilarious it would have been to have taken a photo next to the display, wearing my necklace with the ones in the cases beside me, and submitting that to Ripley's Believe It or Not. But at the time, I hid my necklace, worrying they would think I stole one of the displays. Anywho, this is one of many supernatural stories I have experienced. Thank you for tuning in on these terrifying stories. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And if you have a scary, spooky story you want to hear me read, stab it into the comments section.